Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Freddy vs. Jason. Now, Freddy vs. Jason, depending on how you look at it, is either the 8th installment of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, or it's the 7th. It's the 8th installment if you include Wes Craven's New Nightmare as part of the series, but if you don't include Wes Craven's New Nightmare, then it's technically the 7th. Since I don't include Wes Craven's New Nightmare to be part of the series, I consider this to be the 7th Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Even though I did do a review on Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I still don't really consider that to be part of the series, so this, to me, is the 7th Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The movie, of course, is a crossover between the Nightmare on Elm Street series and the Friday the 13th series. And the movie is the 11th Friday the 13th movie. Now, the movie picks up where the movie Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare left off, and it picks up where the movie Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday left off. Basically, it's set sometime after the events of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. They don't really tell you how long after the events of that movie this is supposed to take place, but you gotta figure it has to be pretty long after the events of that movie, because in the movie Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, you found out that Freddy Krueger had the entire town of Springwood in kind of a supernatural limbo, and like all the adults in the town were experiencing like mass psychosis, and Freddy also wiped out all the children and teenagers in that town. Now, so this is supposed to be years after that, and of course, the town of Springwood is now repopulated, so you figure this has to be a decent amount of years after the events of that movie. But all the adults in the town of Springwood now know about Freddy Krueger because of what he did in, Part 6, so now Freddy's Dead ended where the main character of that movie dragged Freddy out of the dream world and into the real world, and he became human again, and she killed him, and she actually killed him in a really ridiculous way, but that was actually a pretty ridiculous movie. Like, Freddy's Dead was kind of a horror comedy, but, basically, since Freddy was evil, after he was killed at the end of that movie, he, of course, went to hell, so the movie begins where Freddy is in hell, and that's where it also picks up where Jason Goes to Hell left off, because Jason Goes to Hell ended where Jason's niece stabs Jason through the heart with that dagger, and Jason ends up getting dragged to hell by those demon things, and at the very end of Jason Goes to Hell, you see Jason's mask lying on the ground, and then all of a sudden Freddy Krueger's hand comes out of the ground, and basically that scene at the end of Jason Goes to Hell kind of indicated that both the Nightmare on Elm Street series and the Friday the 13th series both take place in the same world, and that's pretty much made a fact in this movie, which crosses over the two series. So what happens is, it's also set sometime after the events of Jason Goes to Hell. Now, this is supposed to take place before the events of Jason X, because Jason X was set in the future. So what happens is, like I said, it begins in hell, and Freddy Krueger, basically in the town of Springwood, the adults in the town have basically, they blocked out obituaries, and they basically destroyed all documents of Freddy's existence in the town of Springwood. So basically they're trying to erase the memory of Freddy Krueger, so they don't tell any of the children or teenagers in the town about him, and which I actually thought was kind of interesting how. And what happens is, children who do dream about him, they end up locking them up so they don't tell anybody else about him. basically they kind of treat him like a disease almost, which I actually thought was kind of an interesting idea. So basically, you know, Freddy being forgotten is what's keeping him in hell. So Freddy, the movie actually begins in where Jason is actually in kind of his own personal hell. Basically, after the events of Jason Goes to Hell, Jason is now in his own personal hell. And his own personal hell, you see him, you know, kill this girl, but you realize it's just kind of a dream in a way. And what happens is Freddy comes to Jason, but he comes to Jason in the form of Pamela Voorhees, and tells Jason to go to Springwood, you know. So Jason, of course, comes back from the dead. He rises from hell and goes to the town of Springwood, and basically when he gets to the town of Springwood, he starts killing people in that town. The adults in the town, you know, think it's Freddy Krueger who committed the murders, and, you know, what happens is, because of that, you know, one of the adults, you know, says the name Freddy Krueger, and the main character of the movie starts having dreams about Freddy Krueger, and basically that's what's causing this whole fear of Freddy Krueger, you know, people starting to remember him again, is what's causing him to come back. So now Freddy's starting to come back from hell, but what happens is, the basic plot line is, now that Jason is back, he starts killing more people than Freddy actually wants him to kill, and now Freddy's trying to, like, shut Jason back down, you know, but that's the basic plot line. So now Freddy has to kill Jason, you know, so he doesn't kill all the people that Freddy wants to kill, and the storyline itself is actually not that bad, you know. I mean, I like the whole idea that the adults in the town know about Freddy Krueger and they're trying to keep his existence a secret from the children and teenagers in the town. I kind of like that idea, and I like the whole concept of, you know, Freddy being almost like a disease, almost. Like, if you say his name to somebody, or, like, if you start talking about him, you'll have that other person will have dreams about him. I kind of like that concept, but, you know, like, I like the general story for the movie, but I do have a lot of problems with this movie, too. Like, one of my main problems with this movie is the characters in this movie are really unlikable, in my opinion. I found all the characters, even the main character, who's this girl named Laurie, I found her to be very annoying, to be honest. I mean, and the thing about the older Nightmare on Elm Street movies and the older Friday the 13th movies is, you know, in those movies you actually had characters who were actually likable, but in this movie, really none of the characters are that likable. I will say, there are two characters who I kind of like. Like, there's this one stoner character who's definitely a ripoff of, you know, Jay of Jay and Silent Bob, you know. Like, you can definitely tell he's trying to act like Jason Mewes, and then there's this one character named Mark who seems to actually know a lot about Freddy Krueger. I actually thought he was an interesting character, but the rest of the characters I really don't care for. And maybe it's not so much the characters, but it's more of the dialogue and the actors who are playing the characters, you know. Really, there aren't too many. Really, I don't think there are really. The thing about this movie is a lot of the acting really sucks. Like, the only actor who really does a good job in this movie, in my opinion, is really Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. You know, but I will say, you know, though I have a lot of problems with this movie, I do like the movie. Like, I like the general story for the movie, and I will say also that the movie is directed by Ronny Yu, who also directed Bride of Chucky, and I actually like Bride of Chucky. I mean, I know a lot of people hated that movie, but I didn't mind that movie so much. But Ronny Yu, the movie actually is pretty well made, in my opinion. It's just not very well acted, and there's certain things in the movie that I think are really stupid, like the whole look for Jason is really stupid in my opinion. Like, in the movie they wanted Jason to, like, tower over Freddy, which is retarded in my opinion, because, like, you know, I mean, why? What's the point of him towering over Freddy? You know, and Ronny Yu, he also wanted Jason to have kind of like this Frankenstein monster kind of look to him, or like the way he walks, which is, he was never like that in any of the other movies, so, I mean, so there are a lot of stupid things about the movie, you know, so yeah, there's a lot I don't like, but there is some stuff I do like. Like, I do like the movie. Like, I will say one thing about the movie is is very entertaining. I mean, it has a lot of flaws, but I will say it's a very entertaining movie. So I do recommend it for that, because it is very entertaining. But I mean, besides that, like, you know, there's a lot of stupid things in the movie. I mean, the characters are really unlikable in my opinion. You know, the movie is produced by Sean S. Cunningham, who also produced and directed the original Friday the 13th, and the screenplay for the movie is written by Damian, Shannon, and Mark Swift, who also wrote the screenplay for the remake of Friday the 13th, which came out years later. But yeah, this movie though, I have a lot of problems with it, but I don't hate the movie. Like, I will say, as a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, it's definitely my least favorite in the series. It's not my least favorite Friday the 13th movie. My least favorite Friday the 13th movie is Jason X, but, you know, it's definitely not as good as the older Friday the 13th movies, and it's definitely not as good as the older Nightmare on Elm Street movies. You know, I will say, though I think this movie could have been better, it definitely could have been a lot worse, because a lot of the story ideas that they came up with before they came up with the actual story for this were actually really stupid. Like, in some of the earlier scripts for this movie, there was this one thing about a Freddy cult, which is like, what the fuck, you know, I mean. So yeah, there were a lot of stupid ideas, but for the, you know, when this movie was in, like, production hell, but, you know, all in all, you know, it is entertaining, so I will recommend it, you know, in that sense, but, yeah. So that ends my reviews on all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I hope you enjoyed this, and bye.